Tell us about the Wim Hof story.
So I got a slip disc in my back, which was really painful. And in all honesty, I had to like drag myself into work some days 'cause it was quite tough to walk. I went to a couple of different physios, and they all tried their best, right? But nothing really seemed to click. And then I went to one physio, and he was just very different in his approach. He said, "Have you ever heard of Wim Hof?" And he said, "Oh, he changed my life and he changed my practice." So I thought, whoa, this is interesting. Then I straight away went on Google, found that Wim Hof was coming to London, and I went to this seminar. And by seminar, I mean it's 3 hours long. He teaches you about the science of breathing. 40 people in the room. You all breathe together with, I don't know what it is. I see colors. I feel a lot of gratitude during it. Like often
Yeah.
I'll tear up just from pure gratitude. And if you came
Wow.
into the room afterwards, you would think, like, are these people on something? We spent 10 minutes in ice cold water, and I did it, and then my back, for whatever reason, just felt $1 million. Wim Hof, he just has some amazing sayings. Before we would walk out to go into the water, he would say, "Silence. You're now going to go from scared to sacred." And he said, like, same letters but different, different meaning. If you really want to experience this, you need to go to Poland and do it with Wim Hof. Went to Poland, and in all honesty, it was probably the best week of my life. Like, and at the end of the trip, then we climbed a mountain. It's called Mount Sneznia. It's about -8 degrees. But at one point at the top of the mountain, we all had to stop because there was someone who had a car up there and they needed someone to push the car. And when we stopped, you were like, oh my God, it's actually really cold.
Welcome back to the Screenship podcast, where we are creating a generation of authentic storytellers. Today, we have a very, very special guest. I've had the pleasure of working in the same company as today's guest for a few years now, and he's done some pretty astounding things. Here's some of them. He's climbed up a mountain in Poland with the one and only Wim Hof. He won the Pitch Olympics twice in our company, and which is a competition to find the best presenter in the whole company globally. And he's also recently moved to Dubai and gotten married. Please welcome onto the show, Gary Daly.
Thank
How
you
are you,
so
Gary?
much. Yeah, thanks so much. You've summarized some cool things there. So very humbled by that.
I'm humbled to have you on the show, man. Honestly, it's so good to connect after a while, and yeah, I'm excited for this conversation. I'm excited because I mean we've literally just jumped on this video call, and we've got an hour to get through a lot of stuff. So yeah, I'm sure this will be packed with value for anyone watching when it comes to storytelling, public speaking, sales, and just to get to know a bit more about Gary. So
Yeah.
first of all, let's start with that amazing background, which isn't virtual. What is it like living in a world of tall buildings and oil? And what's Dubai like? Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's so far it's amazing. And it is funny, every time I've sent a few pictures and stuff to friends and family, and everyone says, whoa, they get vertigo from just looking at the videos or the pictures. So yeah, this is like the 32nd floor of the apartment that we're in. And yeah, honestly, you just get used to, I guess, the buildings and the scenery and everything like that. But you can tell I've actually been working because I clearly have no tan or anything like that. So no, so far so good. Like my wife had actually never been here before as well. She loves it. I think there's a mix of so many different nationalities here, which is amazing. I thought I would miss, and I do miss, of course, the Irish culture and the Irish banter. But honestly, I'm having amazing banter with Egyptian friends, Lebanese, Indian, Pakistan. So it's from that aspect, it's amazing.
Amazing, man. Yeah, I've heard there's a lot of diversity there. It's very quickly becoming the hub of the world. You know, everyone travels to Dubai, which is really cool. But I'm glad you're enjoying it, man. Tell us about what getting married has been like.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so we got married. We actually got married twice, and I keep telling everyone when I say get married twice, it's to the same woman. So we actually, so the cool thing is we had a traditional Nigerian Igbo wedding in London in June, and this was all arranged by my mother-in-law because yeah, I don't think I could have afforded two weddings at the time, and I'm so glad that we did it. Right now, it wasn't in Nigeria; it was in London because I think Nigeria at the moment is probably going over there is could probably be a bit of a challenge. So we had it in London. It's very different to any other wedding. Like there's the traditional clothing, there's a whole ceremony. It was almost like being I guess, outside of your own wedding because I had to sort of sit back and observe it for most of it. And then my wife essentially has to wear three different costumes or outfits, and she has to find me towards the end of the wedding, and then my family have to barter as well. So it was an amazing experience. Like honestly, very emotional and very humbling. And I really thank my mother-in-law because I think in 20 years' time, or when we have kids, when they're grown up, I think to show them that would be really, really amazing. Actually, there was over 100 people at that wedding, so there was more than our Irish wedding there. So we had that in June, and then in July we had our Irish wedding, which is like I guess the more typical one that you'd see in the movies, right, with the white dress and everything. And we got married in Galway, Ireland. And my biggest fear
Wow.
was that the weather was not going to be nice because I did not want to see my wife's face if that was the case. And by luck or by crook, as they say, it was amazing. It was like being in Spain. Like it was 30 degrees the night before, the night after, and the day after the wedding. Everyone was wearing sunglasses. Just an amazing day. We had 70 guests all together, and maybe we'll get into it in the podcast, but like I lived in Australia, London, and Ireland, and obviously here now, but we had, I guess, from India, from America, from Germany, from France. Um,
Wow.
so it was amazing. Like there was a lot of color at that wedding too. So it's been great so far. It really, really has. Had the ring to prove it. So yeah, married life is great so far. There's obviously challenges, right? You're two different people, and me and my wife are very much chalk and cheese, but we just make it work together. It's like I guess a jigsaw piece coming together.
Yeah,
She
yeah,
complements things that I do, and vice versa. So yeah, it's great in all honesty.
definitely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Opposites attract, right? And we kind of see this in the workplace as well. Some of the best teams have, five completely different people or 10 completely different people. So it's really good to hear, man. And yeah, I'm very happy for you.
Yeah, thanks.
Tell us about the Wim Hof story. I'm really excited to hear that one as well. Like, what got you into it? What was the motivation? Had you already been doing like Wim Hof breathing before? And then what was the experience actually like?
Whoa, yeah. I think I think there's that term personal development, right? And I think when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And if I go back to Australia, like I worked with this company and it was quite a tough situation. It was in liquidation and administration, and I started going to sort of business seminars, and that sort of started me off on this, I guess, journey of personal development, just trying to get maybe 1% better every day, every year, whatever it may be. And definitely meditation was a big thing for me. And I remember reading a book from Tim Ferriss, who's the author of what is it, the 4 Hour Work Week, and that was quite
Yeah.
big. And I read one of his books that was called Tools of Titans, and it mentioned this guy Wim Hof, who had world records for sort of cold immersion, and he climbed Everest in his shorts and obviously freezing temperatures. And I read it and I thought that's really cool, but didn't really think too much of it. And then I remember for work we went to Vegas, and I came back, and for whatever reason after the flight, and maybe it was a combination of some gym stuff that I was doing, and I ignored my body when it was in pain. So I had got a slip disc in my back, which was really painful. And in all honesty, I had to like drag myself into work some days because it was quite tough to walk. And I went to a couple of different physios, and they all tried their best, right? But nothing really seemed to click. And then I went to one physio, and he was just very different in his approach, and he had a bit of breath work in it. And as I was lying down and he was sort of doing work, he said, "Have you ever heard of Wim Hof?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Oh, he changed my life and he changed my practice." So I thought, "Whoa, this is interesting." So then I straight away went on Google, found that Wim Hof was coming to London. This is back in, I think, 2018, early 2018, before he, I guess, got mainstream. And I went to this seminar. And by seminar, I mean you bring your yoga mat. It's 3 hours long. He teaches you about the science of breathing. You do a breathing practice, and there's maybe about like 40 people in the room. You all breathe together, which is a really cool community experience. And then at the real end, you go into the ice. So he teaches you about, like, I guess, being calm under pressure. And I went into the ice with a friend from work, and it was really tough. It was a really tough experience, but they just kept telling you, like, focus on your breath. And I did it. And then my back, for whatever reason, just felt $1 million. So I went to another event in Ireland for 3 days with an Irish instructor. And then he basically said to me, if you really want to experience this, you need to go to Poland and do it with Wim Hof. So I went to Poland, and in all honesty, it was probably the best week of my life. Like, it was just amazing. And it was January 2020. And I just learned more about the breathing technique. And it sounds really simple. You lie down on a yoga mat, you do 30 breaths in, 30 breaths out. Your belly sort of goes up when you breathe in, and then as you breathe out, goes down. And then at the end of the 30 breaths, you hold your breath for as long as you can. And you I don't know what it is. I see colors. I feel a lot of gratitude during it. Like,
Yeah.
often I'll tear up just from pure gratitude, but everyone's experience is different, right? And he had us doing this at one stage for 40 minutes. And if you came
Wow.
into the room afterwards, you would think, like, are these people on something? But he has a saying, right? He has a saying, and it's get high on your own supply. And
Yeah.
some people scream, some people laugh, some people cry, and a lot of people say that it is like releasing trauma maybe in your body, or it's just releasing stuff that shouldn't be there. And it's a really good feeling afterwards. And he brings you into the cold then. So, I mean, we spent 10 minutes in ice cold water, and it was just so good. And he just, through the breathing techniques, he told me at one point, like, just focus on gratitude when you're in there, just look around you, even though it's freezing. And it just, I think it teaches you how to be calm under pressure. I mean, essentially what the breathing does is it reduces inflammation in the body. And inflammation is like the biggest source of, I guess, pain and disease. And I've seen people, like, who have serious injuries. Like, a lady had arthritis in her legs, and she felt her legs for the first time. And people who had blood issues, I'm not saying it heals everything, but they seem to find that it really works for them. And yeah, just amazing. And at the end of the trip, then we climbed a mountain. I say climbed, it's more sort of walking uphill, a really steep hill. It's called Mount Snesnia, which is on the border of Czech Republic and Poland. And we
Okay.
literally did that, like, just in shorts and a backpack. And it's about -8 degrees. And you do the walk in silence, and your partner's beside you, and you're all in this big group. And I didn't notice it at all. Like, you're just breathing in and out, you're just looking at the scenery. But at one point at the top of the mountain, we all had to stop because there was someone who had a car up there, and they needed someone to push the car. So someone in the group stopped and helped them push it. So that broke our little walk. And when we stopped, you were like, oh my God, it's actually really cold because, but just really like an unbelievable week. And for me, this is what I do every morning without fail. Like, I wake up at 5, and do you know what? There's a lot of bad publicity, especially sometimes I see it on LinkedIn about, you don't have to wake up at 5 and you don't have to do cold therapy. And I get that, like, completely. And sometimes it can sound like you're showing off when you do that. But for me, like, I'm not the same person if I don't do this. Like, I'll openly talk. Like, I have a little bit of anxiety, and I think everyone does. And this just helps.
Mhm.
It just helps me sort of settle into the day. Like, if I was straight away, wake up, go to work, I couldn't do it. Like, I need to relax a little bit. So for me, like, it's breathing, it's free. I listen to apps or meditation, and I think, and to relate it back to business, because we work in business, there was one point where I went to an event, and I think it was my fault, in all honesty, coffee spilled to my laptop. And one of my work colleagues, she said to me, she goes, oh my God, how are you not freaking out right now? Like, I'd be freaking out if that happened to me. And I do find that with the breathing, it sort of just trains your nervous system to be like, you know what? Like, there's nothing you can do right now. So I think to relate it back to work, and even preparing for presentations, like, that breath work helps, I think.
Mhm. That's really interesting, actually, and especially that last thing you said about spilling the coffee. I think they've done a study on like stock traders, so like crypto traders, forex traders, and they found that they have a much better nervous system, which is really weird because you think of your all analytics, but it's their ability to see a stock, going up and down, and just be like, okay, it's fine. I've made my decision. I'm calm. I trust my decision. Whereas, a non-trader would be like, I've got to pull out the stocks. I've got to grab it. It's that non-reactivity. And I think just like you say, it relates so well to health, to business, to relationships as well. So yeah, amazing story, man. Amazing story. And
Yeah.
I wanted
Actually,
to start with that. Sorry, carry
yeah,
on.
I was just going to add, just because there's probably two other, there's a couple of different, like Wim Hof, he just has some amazing sayings, and the reason I jumped in, apologies, is because it's just come up, but he had some amazing sayings. Like before we would walk out to go into the water, he would say like silence, and he'd say we're now going to go from scared to sacred, and he said like same letters but different, different meaning, and he would always say like trust your gut because gut equals God, and whether you're religious or not, God could be like the universe, whatever it may be. So we just have these little golden nuggets that I just remembered there, and I think yeah, when in life sometimes he just says when you go into the cold water, like just surrender, just let it be, like, and I guess you can relate that to life and business and everything else too.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Like there's a bunch of things we can control and an equal number or way more things that rather that we can't control. And it's how you respond to those things that I think separates you. Because when things are going well, as we know, it's so easy to just be on top and be happy and smile for the LinkedIn photos. But when things are really hard with family or with work or with health, that's when you've got to or with coffee spilling on laptops, that's the moment that really tests you and I think defines your character. So yeah, awesome, man. Awesome story. Let's go from there to storytelling. And like I said, I wanted to start there because I think it's so much better to hear you tell a story rather than ask you advice about storytelling. We've almost got the example there of some really cool stories about you. And let's talk about how you got there. How were you able to tell the story you've just told there and become the best presenter and do all this amazing stuff in sales and storytelling? Tell us about your story. Have you always been extroverted? Is that something that's happened, in a short period of time? Have you had to build it up? What's that journey look like for you?
Yeah, it's funny. I genuinely don't think of myself as extroverted. So I'm a twin, right? And my twin, I think he wouldn't mind me saying he probably is introverted, more so than me. But I would say I probably sit in between both, potentially. But no, in terms of storytelling, like I always think back to when I was younger. When you do these podcasts, everyone goes, "Oh, it's something to do with your youth." But I do remember, like writing stories and creating little books when I was in primary school, and I probably went away from it a little bit. So I think maybe that was early days of storytelling. Irish people generally are good at telling stories. But like I wasn't that great in school or even in university at presenting in all honesty. I think
Hmm.
when I was in Australia and I had that little step back and I started going to the business seminars, the first person I saw, so my twin got me to go to a business conference with various different speakers, and the first person was Tony Robbins. And like for those of you
Wow.
who don't know Tony Robbins, like he's probably the master motivator, storyteller. So like he's 6'5", or at least that he's an absolute beast, but an amazing storyteller. I think I just looked at that and I was like, whoa, this is amazing. And they sort of say like these things can be taught. So I think then I just sort of fell into business. And in fairness to Meraki, they brought up this, Pitch Olympics, and I really went hard on that. I entered one of the first ones. I think it was the first one, and I actually lost by point one of a point, which I was really frustrated with. And then I decided, okay, I'd love to just become better at this, and I started going to Toastmasters, which is like sort of, I guess, world renowned for teaching people how to speak in public, right? And I think, to be honest, with public speaking, a lot of it will come with maturity as well as you become, I guess, more emotionally intelligent, and it becomes easier to talk about topics that you're passionate about. At least that's what I find. So in Toastmasters, one of the first things you have to do is tell a 5-minute story about yourself, and it could be maybe your passions or what you've done in your career. And I find then that you sort of come alive a little bit. And I started going to
Mm,
all these Toastmasters things, and I think that's really what set it off for me. I don't think I'm yeah, maybe I come across as extroverted, but it's definitely not the case. I mean, I sweated through a suit in university. I'll always remember it. I didn't even wait for my team to finish. As soon as I finished, I had to just get out and like change. And I generally am quite nervous. Like if I'm at work and people approach me, maybe there's a group and I wasn't expecting it, like I will generally get like sort of heated up and feel a bit like anxious. So I think sometimes with even with storytelling that can happen as well. But I think it's
mm.
practice, when I think about winning those competitions, it's just repetition, 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 and just being authentic as well. Like tell it from your perspective, I think.
That's so, so true. And especially that last bit, tell it from your perspective. Because I think if you're telling a story that you hate or that you feel is scripted, it's going to come across. Whereas if you can relate that story to your own life, for example, like when we're presenting technology products at Meraki, if we can say, oh, well, I use this in my house and it helped me achieve this, or it's so easy to set up that even my mum can set it up. But when we tell those stories and we involve our own life in it, people can see how much happier we are telling it because we are happier, right? Whereas if we're just reading off the slide, it can get a lot more tedious to present and to listen to as well. And I want to talk about PowerPoint next actually, because we had a chat a few months ago and you said to me that you did this sales call and you didn't use PowerPoint at all. You literally just had your camera on and you presented just raw face to face. And I think that's so valuable because again, PowerPoints and visuals, they can really help, but I feel like they can also hinder your presentation if you overuse them. We've all heard the term death by PowerPoint.
Yeah.
So tell us about that story. I want to hear it again in case I've missed any bits out, and also tell us, why is it important that we're almost minimalists, I guess, when we're presenting.
Yeah, true. I think PowerPoint makes us sound old and we sort of give away our age. Apparently that's the the new thing.
Google Slides.
Yeah, apparently it's like slide deck now. So the younger people say, but I don't know. Have you ever seen like the Chris Nolan the Batman movies? And there's like the last Batman movie, and I think he's like Christopher Nolan or Bruce Wayne, like he's broken his back and he has to like train up and he has to make this jump, right? And everyone's telling him to use this rope, and he tries like several times to make the jump with the rope, but it doesn't quite work out. And then some old man who has a lot of wisdom says, you need to make the jump without the rope. And all of a sudden he actually makes because he's just taken that away. So I think potentially that's maybe where when you take away the PowerPoint and you just focus on yourself, you're not relying on it. So yeah, I mean that was just I think it was a company presentation, and I mean most people will use a PowerPoint, right? But I just thought I want me to be the the center of attention, and I really need to know my stuff if I'm to keep people engaged, right? And it has to be passionate, it has to be authentic, etc., etc. So yeah, that's why I think sometimes I don't really like using PowerPoints. Sometimes maybe you just have one image on the slide and that can tell 1,000 words. But
Mm.
yeah, I mean, I don't think you always need to have a PowerPoint per se.
Interesting, yeah, and I suppose it is all about that. It's about being memorable, right? Like if you're using a PowerPoint deck that you already know is going to be used again by another person, then you're straight away stripping some of that authenticity. And like you say, there's a time and a place where a visual really does make things easier, especially if you're demonstrating something quite technical or even a video or like one of those dynamic slides with like a cool animation which shows everything
Yeah,
going on. There's a time and a place for those, and then there's a time and a place to just strip it all away and have the focus on you, like you said. Tell us,
exactly,
tell us
exactly.
a bit more about what you focus on when presenting, like mentally. Is it just like, speaking slowly? Is it, I suppose it's several things, right? Like looking at the camera or looking at, making eye contact. What are a few things that you focus on? Because obviously you can't focus on
Yeah.
anything, but I assume there's some things you kind of keep reminding yourself of as you're presenting.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I'll probably use something that I spoke to um, a leader, like he's now like a CEO of his own company, and he said he gave me some really good advice, and like in a way I think potentially I was doing this, but he just seemed to have the, I guess, the framework for it. So he said, like, what three things do you want to convey when you go into a presentation? And I think for him it was something like gratitude, energy, compassion, whatever it was. And he just said, like, what are your three things? Because they're going to be different to my three things. And then the last thing is really like, what do you want the audience to think when they leave the room? And I think that's important. Like when we're doing this now, I'm making sure I look, and sometimes I don't blink, which several people have pulled me up on. I don't know why, but just because maybe I'm getting very passionate and not thinking. But I'll look at the green in the camera. I generally have a ring light when I do these. Obviously, I've just moved country. I'm thinking maybe I've ordered one. And I'll just try and be myself. But I'm my own biggest critic. I'm going to look back on this and think, oh, you're using a lot of filler words, maybe things like, so. But you know what? Sometimes filler words are fine. Like you can't be. I just used one there, not intentionally, but it just happens sometimes. You're thinking. I like that. Then you're being your natural self. It's not fully scripted. I do
Yeah.
sometimes think I need to pause a little bit just to let everything settle, right? When I present in public, I remember straight after COVID, I had actually won this competition by doing this. And then I went to present, it was in Ireland maybe 2 years later. And I had to remember you need to look at everyone in the room. And I do try and like catch keep people's eyes, like just look around the room, make everyone feel involved. And less is
Mm.
more, I think. Like gone are the days of these big long presentations. I think you need to capture people's attention, pretty quickly, I'd imagine.
Very true. Yeah, yeah. People's attention span is definitely not what it used to be. And
Yeah.
I love what you said about the three things like gratitude, growth, energy. Because when you first said three things, I thought you were going to talk about, oh, these are the three bits of information. But I think, information happens, but it's the mindset that's so much more important. Like you say, gratitude, energy, and authenticity, or whatever your three are. It's almost like reverse engineering. You're almost imagining exactly how the audience is going to feel, what they're going to remember, and then reverse engineering how do I make that happen with the tone of my voice and my body language and etc., etc. So I love that. I really, really love
Yeah. And
that.
one other thing on it as well, like generally remember in most cases, right, like you're probably the subject matter expert in what you're presenting. So like have that as a bit of confidence, like you know what you're talking about generally. There's always going to be one or two people in the room who are going to maybe they might catch you out on a technical question or whatever it may be, but just I don't know the answer to that. Great question. I'll get back to you. Like you don't have to know everything, but in general, like you will be the subject matter expert in what you're presenting, which to me gives you like the cape. It gives you a bit more of a confidence and ability in what you're saying. So you should sort of use that.
Absolutely. And I think that kind of mindset of you being the subject matter should also influence the kind of language you use. I think people often use far too formal language, and it's actually like just like you say, 95 or 99% of the people in the room will be less knowledgeable than you. So you've got to break it down for them. You've got to cater to the masses. And Alex Hormozy talks about this. I think in America, at least, like more than half of Americans have below a seventh grade reading level. So if you can break down a sentence rather than saying like negative consequences, if you could say, "Oh, it screwed up," like a
Yeah.
phrase like that, it seems almost colloquial, but people love simple conversational language, right? And we want to have this conversation, this engaged conversation, rather than presentation. I'm talking to you, you listen. Like that's the wrong mindset. So
Exactly.
interesting. Interesting. Tell us about some of your best presentation moments, like your best stories, your best sales pitches. I assume the Pitch Olympics was one of them, but what are the other highlights where you just walked out of the room thinking, nailed that?
I don't know if I've ever thought like, oh, I've nailed it per se, but I remember when I won
Perfectionist.
the yeah, yeah, I remember when I won the first Pitch Olympics, and for everyone like that was like an internal competition, like for where I worked, and I got to pitch to the CEO. And I remember we had like almost like a semi-final, but it felt like a final. And then there was basically you're given like three different scenarios, and they draw from a wheel, and you get one scenario, right? And that was like, there's a lot of work. I generally like to learn everything off by heart, but then obviously produce it in an authentic way. I script it out before I do it. And I remember then winning the sort of what was like a semi-final, and then we went into the final, and they basically said to us, "You have 4 hours for the final to prepare," and you were given three new scenarios, and I was like, oh no, because Man United, who were my football team, were playing. And I was like, oh, I would have loved to have watched a little bit of that. But then I just went into this like flow state where it was a bit surreal. Like it just felt like I was on a different planet, and I was able to then take things that I'd learned from previous scripts, if you want, and just put them into place. So it was like sort of doing a little bit of a jigsaw puzzle, and I was just in this really good sort of flow state, if you will. So even before the presentation, like if I'm being honest, I just thought, not in a cocky way at all, but I just thought I will win this because like I can just feel it, like I know all of this stuff, like, and I can present it really well. So it was that flow state beforehand that I got into, that I just felt like this is going to be great. So that's probably the proudest one, because like the CEO of the company was on there, so and then you hear your name called out. So that for me was probably the proudest moment because of the flow state, which is not easy to get into, and I don't know how often I get
Mm.
into it. So that was it.
Yeah, but again, I think the harder you work, the more practice you do, the more likely you are to get into flow state. So it's just more motivation to prepare, to level up your skills, to get used to all these techniques that we all practice. And for anyone watching, if you have not experienced like flow state in terms of storytelling yet, or you don't feel like you have, then a good example of what flow state feels like is in sports, right? If you play football or you play tennis, and you just have those times when you're just striking the ball really well, and you can almost see exactly where you want to hit it, and your body does exactly what your mind thinks effortlessly. Like that's exactly how I would describe flow state. So it's really cool to hear about. Really cool to hear someone's experience of like social flow state, I like to call it, in
Yeah.
conversations or in storytelling, when you just nail it. So awesome, man. And how about the other end of the spectrum? Is there any moments you can remember which were you were just really nervous and you messed up, or you just felt like everything went wrong?
Yeah, that probably go back to what I mentioned earlier about being in university. I was doing my masters, and yeah, I had to present like four of us. I think two of my good friends as well, and we presented as a group. And I just remember going up, and I think, to be honest, that's probably because you're younger. I was maybe what, 20, something like that, and once again didn't have maybe the tools and techniques that we have now, and I think just not being prepared, like you said. So there was 100%, there was no flow state. I mean, it was university, wasn't very passionate about the topic that I was going to speak about. So I think all those things combined, and then you're sweating, and yeah, I think I'm still figuring out life. Of course I am, but back then yeah, everything is just sort of new and it's experimental. And yeah, I just didn't have the techniques like the breathing and et cetera, et cetera. So like I said, all those little things stacked up together help you when you're under pressure. But back then, didn't know about any of these tools. And I think even nowadays, maybe if you're in your university, you have more access to these tools, which can be good or bad potentially.
Interesting, yeah. And I always talk about this passion and preparation. If you've got those two things nailed, there's a 99% chance your presentation will go really, really well, because you know what you're saying and you actually want to say it. You actually, this is something that you want to speak about. Or even if it's something you don't want to speak about, even if it's a particularly, I don't know, boring piece of technology, or something that you don't personally relate to, you found a way to turn it into a story which you can talk about, kind of thing. So like passion, preparation, you've got that, you've nailed it. Tell us about the podcast with your parents. I saw this on LinkedIn and I was so happy because we've had this conversation before. Storytelling is good for business and everything, but also capturing the stories of your culture and your family is really special. So I'll let you carry on actually.
Yeah, sure. So like a lot of what I say are ideas that have come from other people, right? Like I mentioned Tim Ferriss before. So not that I don't listen to Tim Ferriss a lot, but there's little things, books or whatever that I've read, or little tweet or whatever it may be. And he basically said that a lot of listeners were saying, "Oh, I'd love to start a podcast because there is fear of missing out, right? You're seeing all these other podcasts, and sometimes, for me, anyways, you're like, what am I doing with my life? How come I'm not doing a podcast?" And he basically said there was one listener that he recommended, why not just interview a parental figure? Like it could be your parents, could be an uncle, aunt, it could be a friend, a neighbor, and just do the podcast just for you. Like you don't have to share it, it doesn't have to go on Spotify, it doesn't have to be launched. And I thought that's a great idea, right? And obviously I knew then maybe towards the end that I was going to be moving to Dubai, and everything just felt right. I was going to do it anyways, but that probably pushed me. And my wife was great. She's like, you need to do this, with your parents. My parents are like 70 years young, as I say, they're quite energetic and everything, but you never know. Like life is too short. Unfortunately, for some of friends I've seen, they've lost parents. So I just thought I really have to do this. And rather than just do, I guess, a voice, record it in voice, I think my wife, once again, she gives me good ideas, said, why not like get it on video as well? So I said, I'm going to rent a studio, and I found one in Galway where I live. And I mean, the cost was the cost. It didn't break the bank, but I just thought this is worth it because in 20 years' time, you're not even going to think about what you paid for it. So we went into a studio, we're all mic'd up, and I just quickly Googled maybe a few days beforehand, like maybe 15, 10 questions that you can ask your parents. And there was one question that my wife mentioned to me when we were in the car driving there, and it was ask them about their grandparents. Now, in hindsight, I started with that question, and my dad was very emotional, right? My mom was emotional too. So I probably started like from a really sort of emotional place. So like I recommend when people do it, maybe start in a lighter note. But I just asked them all these questions, and it was amazing, like, where they met, how they met, what's it like having kids, like what's it like losing a parent, what they think about the future. Like just, yeah, even probably getting emotional now, but just hearing my mom like describe when she moved to Galway, which is where we're from, like it was, yeah, it was pretty special. And I've listened to it like several times since, and like, yeah, I mean, in 20 years' time, that thing is priceless. And it's not just for me, like for my brother, my sister, like hopefully we're going to have kids. And now the next one I want to do is with, my mother-in-law and granny-in-law, and my auntie Maureen, who basically knows everything. Like she's like the minority report of the family. Like she just can find things. So yeah, it's the best, one of the best things I've ever done, in all honesty. Really, really cool. I recommend it for everyone. It doesn't have to be a parent. It could be a neighbor, it could be anyone, because I think we get caught up now, like say Instagram, LinkedIn, etc. And we think like everyone who's 20 and 30 have made it in life. But I was watching Michelle Obama, my wife, the other day, and she goes like, "Excuse me," she goes like, she's whatever 60. It's like people of that age, like they have way more experience, like they've seen it all before. And I even think now with my dad, there's some conversations that we have, and I'll be like, "Oh, I'm never going to do this." But as he says, like when you're my age, it's going to be a bit different. And I think, yeah, the wisdom that they have is amazing. And because it's your parents, like, yeah, that was a great thing to do, I think.
It's really special, yeah. And I was just in India November and December last year, and I did a similar thing with my grandparents. It wasn't super high quality. I just kind of got my iPhone camera, set up a tripod, and just started talking to them. But you're right, it does become emotional very, very quickly because I feel like it's quite a sad thing that as people, as we get older and as you become a grandparent and your kids move out, you stop having as many conversations. Whereas actually, my grandparents and people of that age are probably the people who should be having the most conversations. They're the wisest, right? They've been through the lot, as you said. They've seen every part of life, over and over again. They've seen things repeat and that like these cycles of life continue. So yeah, that's really, really
Yeah.
special. And just like you said, I'd recommend it to absolutely everyone. Just sit down
Yeah.
with whatever equipment you have, and yeah, just like you say, it's a time capsule. It's using the power of video for good. Because I think for anybody who like turns a camera on, I think we've almost got this idea in our minds that if I turn a camera on and I press record, I'm suddenly an influencer. I need to get views and likes and shares. And no, 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 no. You can use the power of video just for yourself, like you said. Like you've probably got a lot of really cool photo albums. What if you could take that one step further? That's the way I see
Yeah,
it.
exactly. It's funny as well because a lot of people ask me, "Oh, can I listen to it?" Like people from like America, or like people who don't know my parents at all. So it's funny. We all want to listen to these things, but I was like, "No, no, it's just for
Just
now.
yours. Yeah, yeah.
It's just between us." Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, and I'm gonna do exactly the same thing with the ones with my grandparents as well. It's personal and special, and yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. Let's let's flip back to storytelling. We've kind of touched upon this topic already, but nerves, and kind of that fear of getting on stage. When you're on stage, the fear of like starting, and if you're going to say something wrong, how have you dealt with that? I mean, I suppose we've already spoke about the Wim Hof method is kind of like a long-term solution and being prepared and things like that. But is there anything else you'd recommend to people when they're just feeling really, really nervous when storytelling?
Yeah, I think once again, I think it's the preparation beforehand. So yeah, for me, like I said, I like to have that gap in the morning to sort of prepare myself. But I mean, it's probably nothing that you haven't heard before. I mean, exercise is definitely a big thing. Like
Mm,
when I grew up, like exercise wasn't that. Obviously now it's you see influencers, gyms, etc., etc. But I only started in the gym actually in 2012. Like I was very skinny, didn't think I belonged in the gym, etc., etc. But then when you go to the gym, you start getting a bit more confidence, right? You start seeing that okay, I
mm,
was able to lift this yesterday, now I'm able to lift this, and I think all those that I think once again it's about stacking like the amount of things that you can do. But breathing definitely is a big thing, right? Like before you go into a presentation, just focusing on your breath. Yeah, just knowing your topic. Like, I mean, definitely, I still get nervous for presenting. Like, I definitely do. But you just, I think someone said it really well before. Like, if you're, let's just say, if you're late for a meeting, you just have to enjoy being late because there's nothing you can do.
mm.
Like, just enjoy that. Just it is what it is, right? Yeah, it's hard to come up with an exact here's exactly what you need to do to stop being nervous. So I do once again I think there's a bit of an age thing as well. I think that yeah when you're younger you probably overthink things, but you probably just have to realize like most people yeah, I won't say don't care because that's not the right word, but like they're thinking of other stuff. They're not just thinking about you and what you're saying and what you're going through. Like they all have their own issues, their own problems. Like we're all just human beings at the end of the day. And I think, to be honest, I think obviously COVID, a terrible situation, wasn't good. But I think what it did was it sort of humanized everyone because all of a sudden you're talking to a CEO and he has his Under Armour hoodie on and like the washing machine has gone off in the background, the dog's running in, like you just see actually this is just a normal human being. Whereas I think before that everyone was going into work and people will have their suits and ties or whatever, and it's almost like a bit of an act. But I genuinely liked that because I felt it humanized everyone. And I'm relating this back to the nervous thing. I just think that made me even less nervous because you're like, actually, they're all just normal people. You know, I've never seen them outside of their work mantra. So that's probably my opinion on that.
Very, very true. And I love that you started with exercise as well, because again, it seems like such an abstract link. Like, how is talking related to exercise? But just like we've spoken about throughout this episode, your body and your mind and your soul are so closely linked that when you can, almost have control over one of them, when you can exercise and feel in control of your body, suddenly your mind clears up. And I think that's a really powerful connection to make. And I've heard a lot of public speaking experts say this is always try and do something physical before your presentation, or on the morning of like a big sales pitch, like go on a walk, or go to the gym. There's even one person, I forget his name, but he does 100 press ups before he goes onto stage. And it's, I mean,
Wow.
I think that's a little bit too far for me, but he says that that just gets his energy level to like a 12 out of 10, and then he's able to dial it down. And he says this really cool thing where he's like, by doing push-ups, I get my energy level to a 12 out of 10, and then I go on stage and I dial it down to an 8. But I can see that people see those other 4 points like beneath my skin. And that was a really interesting concept to me, is almost have too much energy and then dial it down rather than like almost
Yeah,
going in
yeah.
a
Do you
timid
know
kind
what?
of way.
That's funny because my instant thought there was if I did 100 push-ups before I went on stage, I'd be sweating absolute buckets. So 100% couldn't
Yeah.
do that. But it's interesting. The wrestler Triple H, what he does, I think when he flies somewhere, as soon as he gets off the plane, especially if it's long haul, like he will go to the gym to work out and he sort of acclimatizes into the environment. So I think, yeah, once again, everyone's unique. Like whatever works for you, I'd just be sweating buckets if I did 100 push-ups before I went on
Yeah,
stage.
absolutely. I think it is really trial and error. Like, and it's also finding what presentation style works for you. You know, I've seen some presenters who are, like Tony Robbins style, like bouncing around, energy, like speaking pretty fast as well, and it works. But then there's other presenters that almost walk around the room, start like almost stand and talk to people and literally ask people questions in a really like intimate way, and that really works as well. So there is no right or wrong. You don't have to be like Tony Robbins. You don't have to have that high energy if you don't want to, but it's worth trying, and it's worth trying the other end and all the kind of bits in between as well. So I love that.
Exactly, yeah.
Amazing. Gary, thank you for being on the podcast. We have one more question, but yeah, I really appreciate you being on here. The last question is, what are three pieces of advice you have for anyone who's just starting their storytelling journey or their sales journey?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think for me, yeah, everything probably changed when I started going to the business seminars or whatever personal. So I'd say one is like go to a business seminar, like definitely
Mm,
do. And like I can't say you should go to this exact person. Like what I did was probably, I think I was like 24 when I went, and I remember there was a lady who was probably she was in her 60s, and she goes, "Oh, I wish I went when I was your age," and I was 24. And I see someone who's like 17, I'm like, "Geez, I wish I went when I was their age as
mm.
well." But like, there's no time. I think I mentioned before when the student is ready, the teacher appears. So I would definitely go to that because you'll find people who you gravitate towards. But one thing that I found was if you go to these things, like I think nearly find one or two people and go on their course or their direction, because if you follow everyone, you're not going to do anything. Like you're just not. So that's one thing I'd recommend. The second one as well is like don't be afraid to be laughed at, because in all honesty,
Mm.
like when I started posting on LinkedIn, and I'm not the expert on LinkedIn, there's other experts out there, like genuinely it was probably a source of amusement for a lot of people, right? Like because I was putting up content there before maybe it was I guess the done thing like it is now. So like don't be
Yeah.
afraid to be laughed at or do something different. And I started
Mm.
putting up videos. Like I should do way more videos, and I probably will at some point. But like, don't be afraid to do that either. So I think that don't be afraid to be laughed at. And number three, I guess, like in terms of storytelling, I've sort of mentioned the personal development thing about watching people. If I was to pick a third
Mm.
one, trying to think, yeah. I know a lot of people who do something completely different. Like there's a guy in Dublin that I know, and he's gone to like I think maybe acting classes or stand-up classes, like something to completely throw you. And I
Yeah.
don't, I've done a few things like that. I mean, yeah, like when I did like laughing yoga at one point, and that was absolutely hilarious. Like
I
just
can imagine.
different things just to sort of shake you and put you in an uncomfortable sort of position. Yeah, that's probably it. I would think. Like I don't know if there's an exact structure to what I just said there, but it's all just
Uh,
finding different mentors, trial and error, and just not being afraid to be laughed at. Really is probably the big
yeah.
thing.
Interesting. Yeah. Especially that last point about, putting yourself out there and doing like improv or comedy or whatever. Like I play acoustic guitar and I'm a singer-songwriter. And I definitely don't do as much as I used to, but for about 6 months I was doing gigs every single weekend and 2 or 3 open mic nights a week. And I've got no musical background, and I was probably the worst one there at most of the open mic nights. But yeah, it taught me a lot. It taught me a lot, and it, just like you say, it toughens you. It makes your skin a lot thicker to the point where, being laughed at is just like, oh, that's fine. I've done this hundreds of times before. It happens. People are human. People don't care about you too much. They'll be laughing at you now, and but when it's next week, they'll have forgotten your name. That's just how life goes. It's very transient, very fast moving. But yeah,
Exactly.
Gary, thank you again so much for being on the podcast. It's been a pleasure having you, and kind of gathering your expertise and your knowledge. And I'm sure people will value a lot from watching this episode.
Great. No, thank you. It's been a pleasure. And yeah, we'll speak very soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got to have a proper catch up. I might even fly out to Dubai and have a look at that awesome view.
That's it, mate. Always welcome. Always welcome.